Hello and welcome to Luke.gg. This is my new website that I started building 4 days ago. And I built this as an example of what I can do, an example of what you can use to build a complex web application. I put all the code online on my profile repository, and you can download this. And it's a great start for building a new website. So I suggest downloading it, installing it, and I'm going to use this video to explain how I built it, what's in there, and so let's go over it. Now we got these pages: career, cooking, messenger, meeting. I made these up just to be able to get all these APIs implemented. And of course, if you're starting a new project and one of these might be interesting to you, you can just take it and strip the rest out of the app and use that. So let's go over the pages and maybe you'll find something that you could actually use. So career is one of the pages. We've got an API call to GitHub where I get all my contributions that I've made since 2011. Here you see the total, and here you see a calendar filled with it. Very beautiful, very nice to use. And at the bottom, we've got a Google Maps implementation with markers, and there you can click on things to, get extra information on that particular marker. Another really interesting piece, and also pretty, well, not difficult, but tricky thing to implement. So that's the career page. Then we got the cooking page. This is a page that's just meant to be like a list page. I took cooking as an example because it was easy for me to do and nice to have a website as well to have some references to some good recipes. I only added 3 so far, and it got sorting. So you can change sorting, change what you're sorting on and the direction you're sorting on. And you can also log in. I'm logged in right now, and then you can create a new one. You can create a new recipe, and here you can see it starts up. You can say hello, and here's some ingredients, and then you can change the difficulty, how long it took, and you can also upload a file immediately. Let's take these potatoes, bomb. And this goes to AWS S3. So this is a direct upload to S3, does not go past the server, but the server does generate a pre-signed URL, which is useful for kind of security, kind of making sure people only upload what you expect them to upload. And you can put all kinds of restrictions on there through the AWS SDK. So this is Markdown, by the way, this text. So meaning that it follows the Markdown rules on how to write down, how to generate HTML. Like it turns from this text to this dynamically. And this is basically what's being saved in a string in the backend. So that's how it works. And then, of course, you can save it. And then I've got my test now here. Hi, ingredients. And I can also edit it again and then delete it. So that's a good list. And the recipes, like it says here, the recipes you create are only visible to you. So that's, well, not really a security thing, but more of a useful thing for me in case people start uploading weird stuff. All right, so, and then you got the filter here as well. So that's that page for lists, and I'll show you how to implement this soon. Messenger. This is an interesting page because now you see that I got a Slack message from the Luke.gg bot where it says that Luke, a user, arrived on the page. It doesn't know who I am. I mean, I could add that because I technically do know who I am, but this page is also usable when you're signed out. And here I can, so first of all, let me show you. We got the message right here. So now I can, not this one, but here. And now I can type hi. And here you see that this message is coming from the user. And I can type back, I can say hello, and it pops up here. So these two are connected, and this is a great way for your business or your personal website, like in my case, to be connected with a messenger app to get notifications and quickly talk to your people. And people might expect that this is a bot. That's the more common use case, and you could do that too. But in this case, you're just talking to a person, which is very useful and is a very simple implementation. So I'll show that too. This uses WebSockets in the backend, and of course the Slack API. and it's a very simple screen, just some time and the message itself, and the user is always this orange white guy. So super basic, very clean. Try to keep it very simple. And now the meeting page. This is a very interesting page. By the way, it also says when the user left the page, which I thought was good because then you know that you can stop talking. All right, so this page is interesting because it uses the Twilio API. And what happens if I copy this link here, you say meeting room equals this, and if I copy it and go here and allow my webcam to be used, there you go. Now I get an echo, but you see there's one screen talking to the other, and you can of course do this across. Now I can leave. And interesting thing here, it uses WebRTC in the background. So this is actually free to use for the Twilio API. If you create the Go type room, which you can configure, it uses WebRTC, which basically means that the video is being sent directly from your computer to their computer and from their computer to your computer. And there is a little bit of a protocol in the middle, the WebRTC, which Twilio configures for you. So it's very hands-off. And it allows you to get a feature like this into your website, and you can, because it's free, you can basically open it up to anyone. As long as it's a one-to-one conversation, it's completely possible to do it for free. If you want more than that, you're gonna have to start paying Twilio, although the prices are pretty good, quite affordable, I believe. So yeah, these are the pages that I have on my webpage right now. And now it's time to dive into the code and see how it works, right? Because first of all, even if you don't like any of those features and you want to build something completely different, the setup that I have here is very clean and I recommend it. It's TypeScript, so I'll get to that. It's basically JavaScript with types, and I'll get over that. But now first the client. So client is built in React. Okay, so we can go to the package.json here and go over the dependencies, see if there's anything weird going on. We've got font source, which just, I use Open Sans font and Sen for the logo. So these are just some fonts that I insert. And this is a very nice module, Fort Awesome Font Free. So these are all these icons and they're all free to use. And it's very simple to implement. So definitely Font Awesome has been a great way to do this. Redux.js, which is a method of storing your data. And I can show you detail what that looks like. Here it is. And this is right now my state. I can even show it in another way. Let's see, I think the chart. Here you can see the data that is in my system, and there's a lot of messages here. Actually, these are the Git updates. Maybe I can close them. These are all my contributions that the API loaded. So let's go to a more normal view here. JSON view. You can see the user, I'm signed in, who I am, my email address, whether my email is verified. This is all coming from Google. That's that Google sign in. Oh, I guess I should show you that. So I can log out and sign in again. And I can select my email and I'm back. And the system knows who I am and put a cookie so that if I refresh, I'm still signed in. So those are all features that are super useful. Now let's go back. User, nice. We've got Slack, which tells me whether I'm online or not, and whether, so that's me, Luke, right? Not the user, but the one owning the website is online or not. And the messages are put in here. Twilio, which is nothing but a token right now. It's all the system really needs, a token. The room name gets generated, identity too, but we'll get to that. Github, which is, well, right now it's empty, but if I go to the career page, it fills up with the API request. You can see the request coming in here. So that's what Redux is. It saves all this data, puts it in the right place for me to easily access it throughout my other components and implement it into the website. And here are the default recipes that are always visible, not mine. Those are not loaded in. But these are just the defaults that I have put in constant. So not the ones from your account, but the default ones. And you can see here that it's very simple. Like you got an image, it's just a couple of basic properties. And obviously for your list that you're implementing, which might not be related to cooking, you might have other properties and you can easily change this. So that's why the system is very easy to use. So that's that, then of course we got Google Maps implementation. These are just the types. So for TypeScript, very often you want to install the separate module for types if it's not part of the main one already. So you can see this over and over again here. You can see Google Maps, React, React DOM, React Redux, and React Router DOM to all use the type definitions loaded from a separate repo. So you definitely need to install that. But again, it comes with this repo when you copy it. So definitely keep those in there. Those are very core to making this app run. Any app, basically, if you're using React. Then Bootstrap. So I use both Bootstrap and React Bootstrap. And this is very good for getting a cross-browser compatible styling situation where you get some default CSS already applied to various things. And also you get this amazing, here let me show you an example. Let's see, so here for instance is a modal React Bootstrap modal. What you saw when I was on the cooking page and I was for instance deleting one, and has this confirmation, are you sure? This is directly from Bootstrap. So these kind of features, and also the buttons are Bootstrap. There's a lot of Bootstrap in this page, which helps you just create with very few lines of code quite precise looking interfaces. And of course you can still easily change anything in any way you want because you get the direct SCSS to override. So you're not really power is not really taken away from you, but there are just some good defaults being set by React Bootstrap. So back to the package. We got date functions, date FNS. So this is very useful. Date FNS I use all over to parse JSON, for instance, to go from a string to a date object. So that's a great way to use it. There's also, let's see, I also do some formatting here. So you can take a date object and turn it back into a string based on your format. So another great library to use. And let's have a look. I use this both on the server and on the client, and that's the case with all the agnostic dependencies. Nano ID is the same, so when I generate an ID, I need to generate a long ID that's unique, that I can guarantee is unique. Then I can use Nano ID, which I use in the front end for the Twilio, creating the room and identity, and in the backend as well. So then we got, of course, React Bootstrap that I talked about, React DOM, which is needed to basically start up React to initialize it, Markdown, which is that what I showed you in the cooking page, where you can have that text that transforms into nicer looking like list elements and hr elements that you can style. Redux, which is again what I already talked to you about. Although again, I use the Redux.js toolkit together with Redux because this is more of an addition to it, and I'll show you why this is so nice a bit later down the road. React Router DOM, very useful. This is extremely powerful. This allows you to get this nice. Well, I'll show you the general architecture for your pages. So here you can see that there's a switch from React Router DOM and a route. And so you can say these are my pages that I have, and only it goes from top to bottom, and the first one that matches it goes to, right? So at the bottom you always put the last route, and below that you put a redirect to that route. And that way you have a very clean redirect system, pure front end, everything front end. And then the other pages go above. And you can also match multiple paths. You can put IDs in here, like if you want. There's all kinds of fancy stuff you can do. But again, I implemented it last 4 days, as simple as I could, as fast as I could. Hopefully this can be useful to you. So that's React Router DOM, very useful. And there's more stuff that I need to show you later about what to do with route parameters and URL query. But okay, we'll get to that. React scripts. So this is a CRA. This is a way to start up your app. So you can see CRA running here. You just, in this case, I just do npm start, but you can see that start runs React scripts start. So that's that React scripts part. And it's great because it has these default, like if I make a change, it automatically refreshes. Like it basically helps you with development and sets everything up for you, and also builds your app when you're done. When you build it, everything gets turned into JavaScript, I think version 3, and then you can deploy it on your website. In this case, it's actually super easy what I've done here. The API also hosts the client. So it's a very simple system. Technically, you could also put this whole website on another host and then still connect to the API. I put them on two separate domains in my case, luke.gg for the main website, api.luke.gg for the API. So you could easily split them, but I actually routed with my routing in AWS. I routed both of these domains to the same server, and then the server decides what to show, and I'll get to that when I show you the server. Okay, so we now have gone over, well, have we gone over everything yet? Let's see, Twilio Video, well, that's just the plugin to dependency to make the video sharing work with WebRTC, and TypeScript, obviously, because that's how the whole thing is written. The whole thing is written in TypeScript, so that's what I use. Okay, and then here we got some quick settings for ESLint, Prettier, which is super useful. I definitely recommend installing that extension into your code editor, because it allows you to quickly do a shortcut and clean up your code. Kind of always, never write dirty code that has weird indentations or double quotes where you want single ones. And of course you can change the configuration of this how you want. Browser list helps with the production build, and you just basically define how you want it to run, what you want to optimize for, and these are just default settings, perfectly fine to use. Even in the production setting, these are perfect. So again, I do this professionally, so even if you do this as an amateur, I would still recommend sticking to all of this and just going along. It's a very good setup. So here are the types installed for Node, so I can access the process and things like that. Node SAS to convert my SCSS to CSS. And then some Prettier config files for ESLint, Prettier itself, which again works together with my extension in my code editor. DevTools, which is the thing I showed you here. And the source map explorer. Perfect. Okay, so wonderful. This is all the dependencies I have in the system. Now we've talked enough about dependencies, we can dive into the page, right? So let's go and actually look at this code. Generally, every page I have, the first thing I do is import the SCSS. Here you can see the SCSS. I also have a rule that for the component that I'm writing for, I write it with a capital. That is kind of a little unusual for SCSS, or I mean CSS, to do this. But in this case, it creates this really structured approach to building components. So I definitely like it, and you can easily see the difference between a component and the objects inside of the component. And I always scope it like this. So okay, so SCSS, as you know, I mean, as I hope you know, you can put selectors inside of selectors to automatically generate CSS that actually scopes them correctly. So this app would be repeated for here. Anyway, you don't need to know that. What you need to know is that, of course, this A selects all the A's inside of the app, for instance. Okay, so here you can see my fonts being loaded, specific weights, font weights that I want. And here is the icon set that I use. Okay, so what can I say? Well, I use a lot of Flexbox. Flexbox is a great system. It's I'll show you a little bit about the power of Flexbox. So for instance, aligning things vertically is really the biggest strength of this system. You can see that I said align items center. So normally they're on top, right? And then I want them centered, and it automatically works. It's very nice. Align items, great one. Here I say, for instance, justify content flex end, meaning go to the right. If I remove this, flex start, well, in this case, it's actually the margin here that's doing it. So I have to first disable this margin right auto, which pushes everything away. But in this case, now I can say here flex end, for instance, everything goes to the right. Flex start, everything goes to the left. In this case, I can kind of remove that line because afterwards I decided to shove the logo. I mean, later I implemented the logo, and when I implemented the logo, I of course did margin right auto to make it the only thing on here. So this would work both ways. Anyway, So margin right auto, great trick. If you have one thing that goes away and the other wants to stay together, you just use a margin auto. You can even put it here and push to the left, or put it on the left one and push to the right. But of course, since this is my kind of exceptional A link, anchor link, and it already has a separate class name logo, I use that selector here to push things to the side. Okay, so we got this beautiful basic setup, very simple. Now, let's go to the simplest page I have in my system, right? The dashboard. The dashboard is literally nothing but text and links. So here, with a default functional component, that's what FC means, this is the simplest one you can make, because there's nothing going on here on the top. There's just instantly a return with the elements that I want to show. And there's no refresh, there's nothing. It's just text and styling. And let's look at the styling. Let's see if I'm doing anything special. Nothing special here, 62 lines of code. We got display flex as always. There's a flex direction, which changes, make sure that everything in the system everything in this page goes from top to bottom. As you can see, it doesn't go from left to right, which is the default direction. So that's why I put it on the column mode. And then the internal things, well, we can go over exactly how to style things, but important thing here is just to use display flex, learn what it does, because it's the most important innovation in CSS in a long time. And I remember doing it before Flexbox, and I can tell you, especially vertical alignment, it's impossible. So definitely learn that. And then of course we've got all kinds of fancy tricks down further in the page, but this page is not fancy at all. This is the most basic. You can see something interesting here where I use RGBA a lot, which is a nice trick to make something fade out a little bit on the background. The A stands for alpha, or opacity. So this is only 20% visible. So you don't need to change the opacity of the entire block. You just want to change the background, which I do here and here, here in these blocks, everywhere. Okay, so that's a great trick. Now let's go to the first page where we actually do something, the GitHub career page. So GitHub. Well, there's actually two components that relate to this. The Google Maps I put in its own component. We'll get to that later. And the first one is career. And career imports the Google Map and puts it at the bottom. Okay, so first of all, you see that with date functions, I import a whole ton of things for this calendar, right? We want all kinds of calculations. We want to add, subtract, everything for this page. So let's see how I did that. Like we've got, let's see, first let me not scroll too fast. So we got this top here, which is very important. This is before you start returning. So this is your controllers. This is the place where you write effects and other hooks and do all kinds of fancy stuff, and then you just return at the bottom. You always return the actual components you want to render, and you can use these variables down in there. So first you see that I use query and set query, and this is a hook I wrote myself, the use query hook. And if you don't know what a hook is, well, it's basically a piece of code controller that you might want to reuse. And this is definitely reused a lot. I put comments everywhere to try and help you out. If you're not looking at this video and you're just on your own with the code, then hopefully you can make sense of it still. But here you can see another piece of power of the React Router DOM. You have to use history and use location, which are the hooks that they export. So then what I do is I'll double click location so you can see. First thing I do is I generate this query object, right? We have two things in this whole module. We have set query and query. And query, what that is if I go here to the left, you can see here this question mark date equals something, right? Like a date. Actually, it's only the year and the month. And this is the query. So the query date is this value right now. And I can automatically get that value through here. I start a URL search params, which is a browser API, and I shove inside the string, which is exactly this thing here. And it can get more complex, like you can see that here. I can, here I see sort created direction ASC, for instance, right? So it's relatively complex. You can put all kinds of stuff in here. It can get as long as you like. and then you turn it into a query, I loop over it, put it in an object and give it back. And now the first hook I want to explain is use memo, which is a React hook, very core, used all the time. Because what I want you to understand about React, in case you don't know, is that this thing, like this function, can execute all the time. But what you don't want is this object, this query object, or this set query object to be new, to be different, to be updated. And you use memo to kind of to do this, to enforce this. So use memo, use is kind of use memory, I guess. Well, technically, I think it could also be something else. Anyway, it doesn't matter. How it works is that you generate something here, you return the object at the end, and inside these brackets, you write down when you want this function to be re-executed and this property to be re-returned for this thing to be updated. So if I say whenever the location search changes, so for instance, somebody clicks on this button, right, because the search here changes, then we will calculate this again, right? So it doesn't happen all the time. It only happens when that event occurs. So this is a good way of saving performance and keeping your website from going slow, which is actually very easy to do with React. You have to be very careful and try to avoid wasted, say, CPU cycles. So here, there's another way to do it with use callback. It's the same principle, but instead of returning a object, any object, this is for functions. Because now you can say, okay, so set query is a function, and this function takes an update parameter in this case, and the second one is options. So an update and options, those are the two variables that, the two arguments that this function takes, set query. An update is an object itself with strings as keys and a number, string, or undefined as the values. And I'll show you an example of how I actually use this, because that might look a bit easier. Here you can see that on click, so if I click on the chevron to the left, which is this button right here, if I click on it, then set query date, that means so here I have the first argument. I don't give an options argument, I just give the first argument, and I say that this is an object, of course, and in that object I just put one property, date, and then I format the date that I want to show with, like I showed you, the year and the month, which you can see here. Right, so I just say, hey, update the query to do this. That's it. Very simple. Set query. So again, using hooks, use query hook, very simple to work with those parameters. Everything after that question mark, and to read them and to also set them. And you can also unset them by giving it an empty value. So you can say a date and an empty string or undefined, and then it'll become an empty value in the query parameter. Actually, it will be removed from the query parameter, so it won't even leave the property, which is something also that my function does, which is very useful. I guess I'll show you, even though it might here. So push or replace the current URL with new parameters, and it loops over them. But now here you can see that if there is an update key, if that exists, then I will update it. But if it doesn't exist, I will delete it from the object itself. And then later, when I replace the URL using history, which is that use history hook from React DOM, I say that the path name stays exactly the same that we already had. I'm just updating the search with these new search parameters and toString. Right, so this is the default system to update these parameters. Okay. Well, that was a lot for such a simple feature. I'm sorry. Let's continue. It doesn't get any better, because now we're going to have the first hook that actually connects to the API, the use Github hook. But it's a very nice hook, and I really recommend it. It uses the fetch API. So a bunch of people install all kinds of plugins to make requests, HTTP requests, but I strongly advise against it. The default new API, well, not even that new, it's pretty old by now. Fetch API is very useful and very simple to use. So let's show it. Okay, use GitHub. Now I want to show you the piece where we fetch first, right? Because this is the most important part here. Very simple, very simple. You can see the special await keyword, which is only usable because we're working in an async function. So you have to put that word async in front of a function to do it. It means asynchronous. and it basically means that we're able to let the script first finish this fetch before going to this line. Right, that's what await does. So it's a very, very important keyword to remember. Okay, so we say await fetch. We fetch this from our GitHub endpoint on the server, and we have this special thing called a signal. And signal is useful for if you want to stop your API from being requested over and over again. If I go to this page really quickly and imagine that this response would be a bit slower, I guess, you don't want to keep spamming your API with new requests all the time. And what I do here is I say, okay, this signal is a new abort controller, which I shove into my abort current reference. That's another hook, useRef. I'll talk about that later because it's very important. But useRef is global to this GitHub hook. So if this GitHub hook is doing multiple get contributions over and over, like when the user is spamming, well, in this case it wouldn't be switching page because you would get a new instance of the hook. But imagine that you're using this API call multiple times in one page. Then you can basically abort the previous one. And that's what this line does. Abort the previous get contribution request. If it existed, right? If this signal is there, we can abort it. And then we create a new one, save it on the same place so that the next one can be aborted too. And then we shove this signal into the request. But okay, you can actually remove this variable and completely not write any of this. It is fine. This is only if you want to do an optimization to how you fetch your data, that you want to sometimes stop the request while it's still going. There's a lot of bugs actually where people do this kind of thing where they request some data which might take a while, and meanwhile the user is doing other stuff. And then when it comes back, suddenly the interface bugs out or does something weird that they don't expect because, well, they didn't abort the request when they left the page, right? That is possible. So you gotta, there's a good way to solve that, which is to have an abort controller. Now, the method is get, which is also the default, but I still explicitly stated it here. And the headers, which in my API is always the same, is always content type JSON. I only use application JSON, the only thing I ever write. Okay, so now we can also say here, if the signal was aborted, right, then we will stop here. And we will return aborted true to whoever was using this function. I also have a loading state, which again is the use state hook. We use a lot of states here. So again, very simple. Loading, set loading. Starts off being false. And every time I say set loading, this thing changes too. Very simple. Right? So, and here I say set loading. First I say set loading true in the beginning and set loading false after. Okay, then we got loading is stopped, we got the fetch, it was not aborted, so we have the response. Now I will turn it into an object, and await REST JSON turns that JSON code into JavaScript object, which is of course critical. We need this object, right? This is also why we're putting this whole thing in the try catch block. Here you can see the try and here you can see the catch, is because we're doing both an await fetch, which doesn't work if your internet is disconnected and throws an error, so we want to catch that. But most importantly, we want to catch this. If the data that we get from the API is somehow incorrect and doesn't work, we don't want to crash the browser. We just want to recognize that and then display an error, right? So response is await REST JSON. Now we have the object in here, and then we check with that object. We check what's going on here because we want to know if the status of the request, if the API returned something in the 200 range. Now I can show you the request itself by just refreshing. Network. Tick, and we want to show all the XHR requests, and here you can see the GitHub request, right? Actually I can clear this and show you that when I refresh there's one GitHub request there. Now you can see in the headers this is a 200 OK status code, right, which is perfect. So if it's higher than 300 or sorry, if it's 300 or higher, then we will dispatch an error, because 300s are used for redirects, which I don't use in my API, so it would actually be strange if it was like that. 400 are client errors and 500s are server errors. That is the rule, or actually the standard in HTTP language, HTTP code protocol. And so we only want something in the 200 ranges. We don't care about everything else. So if it's above that, throw the error, show it in a modal, and we're done. This should never happen, honestly, but okay. Now we got the data, we know it went through correctly, we fetched it, everything is basically done. We got it, right? And now I dispatch an action to my store, this is the Redux part, where I set the memory system to add GitHub and then the response. So it started off being an empty object, right? We can actually go to the store to show you. This is my store, and this is the initial state of that store. This is on store.ts right in here. And by default, GitHub has total 0, contribution is an empty object. And then when we get this data, it has total a certain number and a big object of contributions where it's a date and then the number of contributions I made on that date. Perfect. So we got it saved, and now that's it. Set loading is false when you have an error. That's it. Perfect. So now we've explained this whole hook and how it works, and we can go back to the career page, and there we go. Okay, so total contributions, we've received those now with the use selector hook. Another hook that's interesting to explain. Store exports at the bottom here a use selector hook. And with this hook, you can basically write down, it's a function, you execute it and you give it a function in its first argument. And here you get the state, right? And in that state, you just select what you want, and that comes into your main loop. Right, so in this case I said give me the GitHub, give me all the GitHub properties, in this case contributions in total, and then here instead of just putting it on a variable, you can use this special notation to already deconstruct the variable GitHub into total and contributions, and those two variables I can then use down in my code. Okay, so that's the use selector, super useful. You're going to see this all over the place. And by the way, all these hooks, I'm going over them very slowly now, but you'll see that this keeps being reused, so I won't have to explain the other ones. So I'll just rush over all the novelty things that I see that I haven't explained before. Okay, so query date. This is the thing where I want to know what I'm currently supposed to look at, right? And if there is a query date, that means somebody clicked here, then I need to find out what he wants to look at, which month, which I do. I say parse ISO, which is another function from datefn, and I put in the year and the month, and then I add the date and I parse it, and then I get a real date object back. And if nothing was selected, then I take the current date, the new, and this is exactly down to this millisecond, but right, I just want to have this moment right now, which is why by default when you load the career page you see March 2021, it's because of this new date. Okay, so then I want to know what is the start of this week, and then first of all, what's the start of this month, right? So that's actually number one. And because sometimes, here, let me go to another month. Sometimes you get this case where the first of this month is on Friday, and then the calendar is supposed to show things from Monday, right? So I say start month first, and then and I also say that the week starts on Monday because the default is actually that it starts on Sunday. Fucking Americans. But so yeah, we're gonna do week starts on Monday, European style, and then we take the start of the week, and then we get this 28th here, for instance. So that's how I know the beginning, and I do the same for the end of the week, end of the month. So I have the leftmost day and the rightmost day, and then I want to know the difference between those days in days, and then I get the amount that I have to loop. Okay, so all right, let's show a little bit. Oh, first of all, here you can see that hook being used. The get contributions you get from the use GitHub, right? Now I have an effect, and an effect executes whenever anything changes inside of here, right? So almost like that use memo, but it doesn't return anything. In this case, it's just an effect. Okay, so I say whenever get contributions itself changes, which it never does. This doesn't change. Get contributions is an unchanged object. So this only executes once when this object loads. So when loading the page, then this effect goes off, and we ask for all contributions to be received. Okay, that's very basic. Then I say if loading, which is that other property that we got from GitHub, right? That state that I was referring to before. Let me go to it. Use GitHub. This one, right? That one is exported at the bottom, so I can reuse it in this place in the career page. And if it is, then I'm only going to show a spinner. It's actually very quick. If I refresh, you can quickly see it. There, you see it like pop up real quick. That's it. So that's this piece of code that say if it's loading, then just show a spinner. When it's done loading, we're going to show the entire page. So now this is the page. I already explained this on-click handler here where we have the set query. And here is where I format the number that I get from the API, the total, and show it. And then here is where the fun starts for the showing the calendar, right? If you want to have a calendar on your website, this piece of code is very clean. I mean, I believe so, and you can use it. So I loop over the weekdays, Monday to Sunday, right? So I just say, give me a new array. I fill it with nulls so that I can map over it. If you don't do this, the map won't execute a single time. You need to fill it. So I fill it with nothing. It doesn't matter. And I'm just doing underscore here because I'm not using that value. I'm just using the index property, which starts with 0 and ends with 6, right? Because that's a total of 7. So now this is a number that goes from 0 to 6 and repeats itself. And then I put the divs in here and I say, hey, give me a new date, 2018, January. 0 means the first month, so that's January. And then I add, the reason I picked 2018, I remember, is because that was the day where the Mondays perfectly align with the first is the Monday. So that's that's why I picked it. And then I turn it into a format where I show the date. All right, so perfect. This generates that. Now we need to go to this part where I will make a new array and I'll divide the days by 7 and then seal it, right? Meaning that seal means that even if it's like 5.1, it becomes 6, right? It rounds up. That's what seal does, math seal. And of course that's the case because I want to know how many weeks am I supposed to show in this calendar. So that is the and if it's like this case where I'm on the first, then I still want to show it all. I need to know that I need to render this block and this block. So basically calculate this, fill it with nulls again, and then we have the week index, which week we're rendering. We're starting from 0, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's a week. Okay, so I repeat that, and then within it, I go and I loop 7 times because I know a week has 7 days. And I start with the start time, which I calculated in the beginning, right? That start of week, start of month. And I add the weekdays times 7, the week index times 7, plus the day index. So this gets you the day that I'm supposed to render. Then I get the date by just taking this calculated day and giving it a format. And also I want to know whether we're in the current month or not, because when I'm outside of this current month, it gets slightly more grayish. You see that this is a little bit more grayish than these ones, because I put an extra class on there, which is not current month. Some calendars want this to be even more pronounced or want to have separate, like that you only highlight the current month in the calendar. So that's why I have that there. And then I take the contributions, I look at that date that I'm looking, right, how many contributions I've done that day. And if if it is undefined, I don't write anything. But if it is, this is, by the way, I'm writing in the class name right now. So I'm saying that in the class name, I will say the word level dash, and then depending on the amount of contributions, a number. So let's have a look. Right, so here's level 0, level 1, level 2, and I only have a couple levels, I think maybe 4 still too. Let's have a look. I take the contributions date, and if it's over 15, then I'm going to cap it at 15, and else I'm taking it directly and then I'm dividing it by 3. Right, so that gives me that's like little calculation I use to get the level So I don't have to style each individual like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Like I only have a couple levels and that's it. If you're going over a certain amount, you got a bright yellow, bright green situation like this one. 16 the same as 17 is the same as 32 because you're capped at 15. Okay, so now we use, this is very important, of course, when you create a loop like this and you're generating with a map, you're generating multiple divs, you want to always write a key, and in this case I always use the key being the index in there, and this is for React to know how to update this list and stuff, and it will throw errors if you don't. So if you want to keep your console clean with no errors, you need to do this always. And it can actually also render wrong if you don't. So it's quite important. Okay, so and then of course we have in the little right corner, we have the day, right? So that's this thing. And then whether we have contributions or not. If we have contributions, then I will show how many and the little text. And then I have this S being optional, where only if the number is 1, I don't show it. So if it's not 1, I do show it. And here you can see another thing I often do is where I say that the date equals 1 and then I say and, right? Like, or I mean, ampersand, which means and. And I do this because in JavaScript at least, this evaluates to only this value. So if this is true, then it will render this. And if this is false, then it will render nothing. It'll render, I think it's false, which React interprets as nothing. So very straightforward way to do it, and works very nicely, because sometimes you see me inside of strings, for instance, I use the ternary notation where I say this is the condition, question mark, is that condition true or not? If it is, then this. If it's not, then this, which is nice. But and inside of a string I do this, right? Because here you can see I'm inside of the string, so I have to do it. But if I'm in React, then you don't need to do that if your other argument is empty. You can just do it with the and instead. It's a bit cleaner. So I definitely recommend that. Perfect. So now we've gone over how to render a complex page like this, how to use a bunch of hooks, and I use date functions and effects and all kinds of fancy stuff. So now let's take a look at another fancy part, Google Maps. Google Maps is interesting because this is something that Google Maps developers themselves said as well. You should never initialize a Google Map more than once on your page. So it should initialize once, load once, and then be done. That's it. And in the beginning, when you load your dashboard, you don't want to load Google Maps right now, right? You don't want to load all that code. In fact, I don't think they even allow you to load the code locally, or at least it's kind of difficult. They want you to use it dynamically, to load it from their API. And I'll show you where I do this. This is where I do it. I load the script, and it's called lazy loading, right? This is when you hear and lazy load the Google Maps JavaScript library. So I only load it when I need it, lazily. I don't do it preactively. I'm not an active guy. I'm a lazy dude. I'm gonna only load it if I really need to. And let me show you. Like we can click on JavaScript here, go to the career page, and boom, you see that there's a bunch of extra JavaScript loading in from Google Maps. Right, and the thing is, here I'll clear this and I'll go up and down, and you see it doesn't happen again. It only happens once, which is the special thing with Google Maps. In fact, the entire map is never removed after I render it. I just hide it. Here you can see that, right? If the component unloads, then we will hide the Google Map container. So the container is not really even part of React. It's kind of something outside of it, because Google doesn't understand React. I mean, they don't, their library doesn't need to know how to interact with React. It just renders DOM events, like it's more basic, so to speak. So with React, you kind of need to work with it, and I'll explain how I use it, right? How I work with it. Here I create a reference, which is basically just something that, references are things that always have the property current inside of them. Current. Here you can see another one, current. And they are not tracked by React. So if this current changes, React will not re-render or do anything because it's not even aware of it, right? Like, and there's a single reference as well. So even if you use things multiple times, this reference will stay the same. Anyway, you'll see that more later. So in the beginning, I say that the map ref is null. Mapref.current, I mean, is null. But when I give it, it will be an HTML div element, right? I already explained that here in my types. So let's see where we set it, right? Like boom, 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 here we set it. Here we have a layout effect, and a layout effect is another one of those hooks, very interesting. So a use effect happens before the interface is rendered. A use layout effect happens after the interface is rendered. That's an interesting difference between those two effects. Anyway, it doesn't really matter in this case because we're just going to have a map ref current. If it's not found, meaning it's null, then we need to find it, right? So we're just going to use a good old basic default hardcore document query selected Google Map container. And in the beginning, when you arrive on this page for the first time, you've never entered this page, this will also not be found, right? So if it's not found, then we're finally going to create it. We're gonna create a new document create element very programmatically, right? Very old school. This is raw DOM operations, but it's very useful in this case because we don't want React to do any fancy work around Google Maps. This has to be outside of React. React has to work with it, but not be responsible for creating or updating these properties. So we're just doing it old school style manually. This is how I actually used to do it all the time. So it's not that weird for me. Create an element div, then to add to the class list Google Map container. Class list is actually super new, but anyway, it works. And we also have compilers that in this setup, I'm giving you this repository. It automatically translates this to a better version that is more proof for browsers that don't have things like this. There's automatic polyfills in here. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So we add the Google Map container class, and then we append it to the body. So to the body. Now remember, in this app, show you these elements, everything is happening inside of root. That's where React takes over, so to speak. And then inside of app is my first root object that I myself wrote. And inside of there, everything happens, right? And main then renders career, and it's all nested, okay? But if I then put something in on the side, here you can see the Google Map container, right? So it's completely outside of the rest of the system, which is exactly what I wanted, right? Now, I've now added the Google Map container, okay? Imagine, I've just added it. And well, ignore this for now, because right now it's already visible, but we just want to show that container is what I'm saying. And then we're going to say, if the window init map doesn't already exist, which is a global function that we define, we will define it and we will load it. But remember, now that I've done this, no matter where you go on the website, this will always stay defined because it's a global. So window.initMap will always be there. And this script will also have been loaded and will stay there, right? So you're not changing the Google map. You're not even removing it. You're just hiding it. You're just doing this once and not again. So that's how it loads this library. And also this key is very important and comes straight out of your React app Google Maps key variable. I've made, I can't show you the keys of everything. Well, actually for the front end I can, but for the back end I definitely cannot, because that would be a security leak. But I made env.examples to show you how it's done, right? So in this case you can see that we got a production API that you should fill in and a Google Maps key that you should generate. And you can just go to Google Cloud Console and generate one. It's super easy to create a project there and to add a key. And then you can have your own Google Maps card. And there's also AWS implementation for that uploading that I spoke about. And for that you need to know the bucket name in this case. Actually, well, doesn't matter. I use it for something else, but doesn't matter. It's very useful. But the backend has many, many more. Actually, I'll show you how many the backend has. The backend is a serious end file. Bam! Right? AWS key, AWS secret, bucket, region, cookies. I mean, there's a bunch to talk about in the backend. Let's not even get there right now. We're gonna stay where we are. This is a long video. There's a lot of talking. I need to drink more, I guess. Okay, where were we? Google Maps. Boom. All right. So now with this layout effect, something interesting happening here. I'm saying that when this unloads, like this is how effects work, right? Inside of an effect, you can return a function which will execute when the component unloads, or actually whenever this changes and the previous instance unloads, right? So, and in this case, what I want then is for this thing to be hidden. So I add the class list hide. And in the beginning you saw that I removed it. So whenever this effect starts up, I remove the hide, and if someone leaves the page, then I hide it again. So this whole thing about Google Maps is never really going away. It's just being hidden with CSS, just a CSS class name. Okay, now, and then the only thing I actually show in React in this component is a Google Map itself. Is a little employment history. So this little bar here, that's React. And then right below that is my Google Maps. All right, and this will depend on how you position your map. Okay, very good. Now we've discussed all of the career page now, every single part, which was very interesting, very nice. I guess one thing I should maybe that I kind of went over too quickly is this this middle part here, init map. So again, this is the function that gets attached to the window object and is executed only once by Google itself. And you can actually see that because here you can see callback equals init map. Meaning when you load, look into the window and find the method with this name and execute it. That's how Google Maps wants you to work with it. That's how they want the callback to be done. A very old school way of doing it actually. So that's how I did it, right? I init mapped it and I put it in the window and then they can execute it. And now this Google Map, when I started off, I say where to go, how to zoom, and that it should use the map ref current div that I already inserted into the page before I loaded the script. So now this can be used. This can be used to load the map. And then I have this little window. That's the thing you're looking at when you click on those markers. And then I go over the markers, and I want to show you where these markers come from, because this is in my constants file. And my constants file is filled with, again, constants, things that don't change, that keep being reused over and over again. And these markers are one of them. They're not part of memory, not part of my store, because they're static. Nobody is able to change them. They're just hard-coded values, so to speak. So that's why I put them here. And a title, and then a position where I want the marker to be drawn, and then the content. Again, this is they want it in HTML. I can't put this as part of React because again, it's Google Maps. They decide how their API works, and they want it like this, so that's how I do it. You give them the content in a string format of HTML code, but it's very basic HTML. And of course, you can style this, which I did. Yeah, and here you got my whole resume basically. Well, not all of it. I just put the key ones with nice positions because then you can look at the map and see that I worked all over the place. Anyway, back to the markers. Okay, and then here one thing I do is if I created a marker which is index 0, the first one, which is my most recent job and the one I currently have, where I'm currently employed, that's the one I will by default open. Right, so in this case, Base Esports Solution in Berlin, that's where I'm making this video right now. And I lead the development there of applications that manage and visualize esport related data. Right, again, with React, same thing I'm doing here. This is my favorite stack. This is what I'm the fastest at. So I can definitely recommend using the same stack because it just works so wonderfully for building apps. All right, so when clicking on a marker, open the pop-up link. All right, so you just add an event listener to the marker, click, and then you take that Google Info window you defined before, closed it because that's the previous one, set the new content, and then open it in this new marker. Basic. Okay, so that was all the code for the career page. Very good, and now we can move along to the cooking page. All right, cooking page is fantastic and super difficult. I think this is actually front-end wise, this is definitely the most difficult page there is. Because a lot of stuff is happening here on the front end. Actually, back end too. The cooking is a very hard page, and I think also the most broadly applicable to other people, because anyone wants a list, everyone wants a list, right? Like any customer, any business, even your personal website. I cannot even think of a single example where people don't want a list with special properties and sorting options maybe as well, right? And then I added the extra features of creating stuff too, so it gets real complicated real quick. Okay, so that's why I split it into two parts. I split it into a cooking part and then a single recipe I've put separately. And it was a good thing too, because this is 182 lines for just a single recipe, just showing only this block. So it's quite heavy, and the reason, of course, is because I'm allowing editing on it, right? So this turns into an object with all kinds of extra inputs. It's like a wizard, and I'm trying to make it feel small. I guess in an older style you would have a separate page for this or a pop-up, but I wanted to keep everything super nice and tidy and together. But of course the code is different. Like I'm not showing this range attribute when you're done, when you saved, right? Here it's just a simple div. So I had to reuse the styling, but I could not reuse some of the code because there's new elements that need to be inserted. So we'll get over that. Let's first start with cooking in general. So you can see a bunch of React Bootstrap stuff. Form, a modal for the delete, the buttons, the spinner, the tooltip, the overlay. That's just for this little one. Recipes you create are only visible to you. There, so that's the overlay trigger and the tooltip doing that. Very useful properties, very nice. It also has a great website, by the way. React Bootstrap, this website here, components. Very wonderful. This is everything you might want is here, right? Overlays, buttons, all the kind of buttons, the styling, and you can change all this styling. You can change the defaults, but this is a wonderful library to use, and you can definitely see it at work in this page. Okay, so then a recipe I import, of course, and then the rest of the stuff comes from my hooks. Use selector, use dispatch. So dispatch again is to send something to the store, and selector is to get something from the store. And what you send from the store is an action, right? So I get everything from my store. And then here I have a type called recipe2, but because I already have an object called recipe, I now rename it inside here to recipe type, just to make sure there's no confusion between these two. And I can still call it recipe, which is what it is, right? This object is definitely a recipe. This type is also definitely a recipe. So I just wanted to keep them the same. And here we have a hook for using AWS, my connections to my own API to implement AWS endpoints, and use query, the good old known use query. Actually, I'll change this sorting. I like sorting things basically based on length. I do that a lot. Kind of creates more visually appealing. Anyway, all right. So API URL is taken from either dev or prod, depending on the node environment. Easy. Okay. So cooking, dispatch, save on change. All right. Well, this starts pretty difficult right away. Okay. So like I told you, useRef false means that you have a save on change dot current, right? And you can see it here too. Save on change current. And that one is not tracked by React. It lives on its own, again, it's some reference. And we're going to use it because in this case, we want to make sure that React doesn't update when this changes. That's kind of what we want. We don't want to track it. And of course, we can still say that we use save on change. For instance, inside this use effect, we say save on change. If that changes, then execute use effect. But remember, that's the save on change as a whole, if that variable itself changes. But save on change current, which is the object inside of it, is not being tracked. So that's why this is what we wanted. Because now I can say, okay, I'm using save on change here. So I need to put it inside here because you want to be able to reference it, the correct version. And I put it on false when it's done saving the recipes. By the way, by default it is false, and here we already say if it's not true then return. So meaning in the beginning this won't execute. It's only in other places where we say save on changes true, like I said here, this enables the use effect hook that saves the recipe. The hook will only trigger after the update recipes action has updated the store. Because you can see, let's go back here, if recipes change, then this effect will execute. So if this value has been put on true, save on change true current, and then the store gets updated, recipes get updated, then this function will execute. And then it will not execute again. So this is a great way of kind of layering your effects, where first I wanted my store to be updated and then I wanted to save the recipes after. And I want to do this, for instance, also when I delete a recipe. First I want to delete it, update my store, and after the store is updated, I want to save the new file so that I can save the new list that doesn't have the thing I deleted anymore. Okay, so save recipes in this effect using a special technique with a ref. Very hard, very... I'm sad that this is the first thing I had to explain about this page, but anyway, we're diving into the deep end. And honestly, if you're following this video and you're still here, then congrats to you, because this is a barrage of words, and I guess you should probably just use the Git repository itself to get a little wiser. And if you're watching this video, well then you're in for the bonus material, so to speak. Okay, so we got recipes and user. User will be null if we're signed out. So this is just interesting because when you're signed out, let me sign out, things change. You can instead you can see here add your own recipe, sign in. You don't see a create button, and of course your own recipes are not visible anymore, right? So I need to know whether we are whether we are signed in or not to do that. And then recipes here. Loading, upload, save recipes, load recipes. So this is a bunch of things we're doing with AWS. Okay, loading is a boolean, yes or no. Are we loading recipes right now? And if we are, you can see it here. You can see it. Oh, maybe I should sign in so you can see it. Here, there. See that little loader right real quick? That's based on this loading. Upload, which is for the image. So like you saw here, when I select an image, it uploads and bam. Perfect. This is so ugly, I'm going to delete it. But that is the upload function doing that. And then save recipes, which again is just a simple request to the server. Well, let me go over it in the hook. Okay, use AWS. This is a beefy hook. It has a lot to do. There you go. You got upload for images, save recipes for saving the total JSON file that I have, and load recipes from AWS S3. Now, loading is the simplest one because, again, I'm just using a fetch like always. So I already explained how I do this, and you can see the structure is very much the same. I still keep it in a separate file. I don't abstract it any further because I want to keep control over every line that happens here in every hook I write. I don't want to make this uniform because, for instance, here you see I don't have an abort controller. Right? Because I don't assume that load recipes would ever be spammed. In this case, I felt like a load controller was not necessary, so I don't write it. Right? So it's beautiful like that, and you don't end up with globalized functions with a million options. I don't like that. I like to be a programmer that is in control of every line. So I don't mind that the structure here looks a little the same as you've seen before, because again, we're dispatching to another place. We might want to show a different error message. This request is definitely different. I mean, in this case, because we're requesting to AWS, I added headers. Before with the GitHub request, you saw that I only did content type application JSON. But now with these, I had to add new headers to make sure there was no cache from S3, because S3 is aggressively trying to cache your stuff. But I never want to get the cached version. That would lead to a bug in my system. People would think that their stuff is not saved, and it would be very sad. So we're definitely putting these extra headers here to make sure we don't get that. And here you see that I use that React app AWS bucket environment variable to dynamically select the bucket, and then based on the user's email, I get their index.json, and that's where their recipes live. Right, so that's the file that I've saved in save recipes. So let's take a look at save recipes. Here you see I go to my own API. I don't go to AWS directly because in my view, saving a text file I can do through the server. Saving a big image file on the other hand, that I don't want to do on my server. I want to kind of directly upload it to AWS. But in this case, saving recipes is just a very small amount of text basically. So I'm just going to post that directly to my API. And I also want to check the credentials. I want to verify that this guy is signed into Google. Right, like so I add the credentials, meaning I add the cookie, and I can show you. So let's again create one. Let's go to my network tab. We're just gonna save it right away, and then show the XHR. Here we see the request, right? Save recipes. Now, if I go to cookies, you can see that I have signed in user signature. Right, so this is perfect. This is what I wanted, and this signature will update. It's a rotating key set, so once I sign out, it's safe again. And these two basically are set because I'm working localhost, which is also where I have my work. So don't mind these two. These are the only ones I use. By doing credentials include, I'm sending those to the API. And then here you can see that I take the recipes, but I filter them out. I filter out the default ones. I only want the ones where this user created them. User email equals recipe creator. And those are the ones that I save on AWS. Okay. And then I send that request, and I'll show you later how to save that in the bucket. Now, the most difficult of all is this one. This is where first we ask the API, hey, I want to upload this image. Give me a pre-signed upload URL so that I can use that to upload the actual image. So here you see we're not really sending the image, we're just saying this is the file name of that image. Okay, very straightforward. And then it comes back, here we go, with a response. And the response is an AWS upload response, which I've defined myself. Which is, again, this is what AWS by default does for AWS pre-signed URLs. You have an upload and a link. This is from AWS. This is my own creation. So the link will be the link that it is when you've uploaded the image, right? So after you upload the image, you can start using link. And but in order to upload it, you need to go to the upload URL. That's where you need to post this image to. And there's also a bunch of fields that they come, which you need to add as well. So, by the way, what did I change here? Oh, the sorting, no problem. Okay, here, go back. So let's have a look at how we do this, right? So let's go to the upload function inside of the cooking page. Upload file. Okay, here. Income's a file. So first I want to show you where I execute this function. It's inside of recipe. Here we go. So I pass this function through the cooking page to the recipe, to each recipe that's being rendered, gets a reference to this method. Here it is. And then I say, I'm inside of a form control for uploading the image, which is this thing. This choose file button is this form control, which is just a basic input with the type file. That's just default browser behavior. And then when it comes in, there's a change event, right? HTML input. And then I will map over the target files. I will loop over them basically. And for every file that's in there, and in this case, you can only select one, but this is just how the API works. So I have to loop over it. It's always in an array. I'm going to upload each of those files. Okay, in this case, only one. So, and then the index that I sent here is not the index of this array because it's only one. Like I told you, that's how this thing is configured. You can add the parameter multiple, by the way, and then it would allow multiple uploads. But of course, in our case, we only want one image. And the index is actually the index that I get here, which is the index of this particular recipe. Because then later, after I'm done uploading, my script will save the URL for this new upload in the right recipe. So that when I click here and I upload and the image comes back, it knows when it's uploaded in which of these three to put, or these four, to put the image. Right, so that's why I need the index, the file and the index. And the file again is a default. I did not define this type. This is a browser specific, a browser API, file API. So it's I didn't do anything to this, right? This is default behavior from the browser. And I'll show you how this works. So upload file, it says, okay, I got my file, I got my index. First, I'm going to take the file name and ask to upload it. Then I'm going to have either an error or a response. If I have an error or no response, I'm done. I'm just not even going to do anything. I mean, I already told you that if something went wrong, then the error was popped up here. So if an error returns later, we don't care. If response is empty, we don't care. We just stop. Okay. So over here, we don't do anything with the error because it's already handled. So we just stop. Now I'm going to create a new form very manually, form data. I'm going to add all the fields that AWS asked me to put on the field, to put on them, right? So very straightforward, just loop over that and append all of these properties. Then I'm going to add my file, add the image, and then I'm going to send this request straight to AWS without cross-origin resource sharing. Just send a post straight up with a body to the URL. And you also have to, of course, configure your buckets to allow this, right? You need to be able to allow pre-signed URLs and stuff like that. But once you have configured everything on the AWS side, you can simply post this and it'll be working. Okay, so now I showed you that trick that I talked about before, that you say save on changes current is true. Then I'm going to update my store, because if you try to immediately here on this line say that you save the recipes, right? Because you just say, okay, I updated my recipe and then here save them, right? But the problem is that this dispatch is not synchronous. It doesn't mean that right here you can already access the store is updated. You need to wait. You need to wait for that update to happen. So that's why I do that trick where I say save on change. So wait, and that I can already put on true, and React won't react to the change. Then I dispatch, and as soon as the change happens, it gets saved. Okay. Oh, there's a problem in my code. Oh, see, this is where it's very useful to be able to do Control-Shift. This is Prettifier at work. I just use a shortcut, bomb, it's solved. Very clean. Okay, we're going back. No more problems. Back to the terminal. Okay, so we're in cooking. We were discussing upload file, which we've now done. And again, I need to show you the actual backend for this, but I'll do that later. First, we're going to go down to delete recipe, which is very simple. We make a shallow copy of the recipes, new list slice. We remove with splice. We remove from this array the index that you want to delete. And then we say save on change true, dispatch, and then set the other ones on null. And this is the index that keeps track of what you're trying to delete and what you're trying to edit. Because in the beginning you first say, okay, I want to edit this. Now the edit index is put on, in this case, 0, right? Because it's the first one. And then when you say delete, now the delete index is also put on 0. Now when I click on delete, that's when this function executes. So it needs to put both those values back on null to make sure to not show any open editors or open modal, so to hide them again, right? Turn off the recipe edit mode, hide the delete recipe modal. And of course, this has now been updated. We've saved it. We send the save recipes request again to the server, and it's all good. So that is the cooking page. Of course, the recipe itself, well, this is a serious object. I mean, we have all kinds of special situations. The default cards are different from the special ones that you create yourself, mostly because of this choose file and all these other editors. So you see me checking a lot if the recipe creator equals their user email, right? That's another one of those things. And by the way, this question mark is super useful. Basically, it says if this object is null, you can still check for email because it'll already stop at user and just return, I think it's undefined, right? So it won't crash. Without this, it used to be old school JavaScript that you don't have that. And then, object is possibly null, so you could crash your code basically. And nowadays you just put that question mark there, and that's in case you know that user might be null, but if it's there, check the email and then compare it with creator, and these two values need to be equal. Simple. Okay. Well, is there anything special I want to show you? Well, for instance, here I say if the creator is the email, then we show the picture that they have and their name, and else we just show, and I hard code this, my image and my name. So this is hard coded basically, and this is dynamically coming from your user account from Google basically. It's your Google picture. Okay, here you can see we do a formatting for the date. We have a nice what can I show? I mean, here the difficulty may be fun. Form control type range, right? So that's that little, this one. It's very default. This is just a basic browser one, nothing special. Probably looks really ugly in Internet Explorer, I haven't checked. Okay, and every time it changes, I dispatch a new action. And I want to show you these actions real quick because there are not that many actions. We got set, which is a general action I use to update the whole store, whatever you want. And the spread operators here are super nice. It basically says, hey, copy everything from state, all the properties that you currently have in the current state, but then overwrite all the properties that you find inside of this new payload. Right, so if you want to update something, so let's see where we do set, right? Set, not in the API, but in the client. For instance, set error, update that property. So you don't clear the whole story, you just update error, only error. Twilio here, set Twilio, so your only setting only updates this property that you define and leaves the other ones the same as they were. That's what this set function does. Add message is used in the Slack page where we just push a certain payload on top of the messages we already have. Set online, same thing, and add recipe is here. Add recipe is for a new one, for when you create and click on the create button. We add one to the beginning of the array and we keep all these values empty, but by default we already fill in the user creator, which should always be there because the button is not visible when you're not signed in. And also fill in the created by default. And then update recipe is also really wonderful because there I put the index inside of the payload, and then this way I extract it again. So I extract from the payload the index, and the rest of all the properties combine together to be the recipe. So this spread operator here is very useful because it basically, I think it's called rest operator. Anyway, its index is pulled out. The rest is kept together but without index. That's what you're doing in this one line of code. And then you just say, okay, grab me the recipes based on this index and update that one. And again, it's an update, meaning that this payload is leaving the properties that you haven't defined to be what they were before and only update the new ones. So that's why inside of this thing, when I say update recipe, I only give an index and a difficulty. So difficulty is the only one that's being updated. Index is being used to search it, and all the other properties will stay the same as they were. And this happens every time this range indicator gets dragged. So it happens now, and now. That's how that works. And I do the same thing for duration and same thing for the text that you write. It's all the same. Okay, well, this was the cooking page. I kind of went over everything. Maybe, no. One thing I definitely, I need to go out of edit mode in order to make this thing work. This thing is kind of interesting because, like I told you about the query URL, right? Like this thing. And I do want to show you how I did that. So let's go over that. In the beginning, we load the recipes. I showed you that hook. I showed you this specific function from that hook. Saving the recipes with that trick. We did that. We did uploading. We did deleting. And here comes a special, this is the last one, the sorted recipes. So again, this is a case where I wanted to know what the value was before, because in some cases, while editing a recipe, you want to keep returning the same memo that we had before. You don't want to recalculate the sorting when somebody's in edit mode. I wanted to disable it because then I also have to update the index and it's annoying. So I just want to disable it. You can't sort or filter while you're editing. So I say if edit index is not 0, then we're just going to return the previous value that I already saved. right? So sorted recipes current is from the previous one because we're trying to recalculate the new one. And in this case, I'm only updating changes that are made to this specific recipe. I'm not changing anything else. So very straightforward. Okay, but in the case you're not editing anything, then I do want to calculate the new sorting. So I'm going to look at these properties. And again, these properties come from here, right? So I look at the query sort, and if it's not there, then by default it's created. I look at the direction. If it's not there, by default it's descending, right? So that's my sorting. And I also have a filter for only my recipes, which is that little checkbox here, right? In this case, there are none because I deleted them all. But so I use those, boom, over here to filter. So let's first show it here. When I go over these sorted recipes, there's a little filter right here, right before I show the recipe, and that says if we have only my recipes being false or the recipe creator equals my email, then we show it. So that basically, if this is true, then we only want my recipes. That's how this filter works. So it's a very tiny little one-liner that creates that filter. And then for the sorting, let's go back to the sorting. Here you see the sorts. So I take the recipes, I slice them to make it like a shallow copy of the list, and then I sort that list A, B, so left and right, and we need to compare these two, and then the sort function will put it in the right order, right? So we turn the direction into a 1 or a -1, depending on whether it was ascending or descending, right? And then we, depending on what we're sorting on, we change the function that it returns, right? Or the value it returns. So in the case of JavaScript comparisons, this is a very funny one. If you just do lowercase and name, and you compare those two values, that's alphabetically sorted, right? So you can kind of act like it's a number almost. And that operation works in this case. And also, so this is true or false comes out here, and depending on the direction, we're gonna either return 1 or a -1. So we're changing this based on direction, right? This is 1 -1, this is 1, and -1 times -1. So it can be both -1 or 1 depending on, and you can switch that by changing direction. Anyway, a little bit complicated, but it's actually not, because yeah, you just need to yeah, JavaScript does most of the work for you in one line, basically. Difficulty is the best one, easiest one, because here you don't even have to do anything. You just take the difficulty A minus the difficulty B times the direction, and that's your sorting number, right? So that's the difference between the two. And the same here. We parse the JSON with the date, then we do value of, which gives you the amount of milliseconds on this date since 1980, which is, you know, the Unix timestamp kind of. So that's how we minus those off each other, and then again do times the direction, so 1 or -1, to fix the sorting. So then you end up with a sorted list, basically. So we just do client-side sorting, very simple. If it was server-side sorting, which you would do on huge lists, you would probably do it server-side. But again, then we're talking about huge lists where you need pagination. If you don't need pagination, you can show everything on one page, it's fine to do front-end sorting. And in this case, how many recipes are people really going to have? Even if I show all the recipes made by everyone on this website ever in 2 years, it'll still not be enough. In terms of performance, I can still show it just front-end. So yeah, we're talking about big databases before you decide to put that in the backend. And again, then you need pagination coming from the API, and you just make multiple requests. So in our case, it would still be easy. You just have a hook to the API and you make some fetch requests and you're easy. Okay, perfect. So cooking is done. Let's take a look at Messenger. This is not too difficult to do. This is a pretty small one. Let's have a look. Oh, boom. Oh, I really have to clean up lines of code here. Boom. Okay. I have to resave, so it just says I left the page and joined it again because it refreshed in the background. But okay, loading and send comes from the use socket. And then send is what I use here to send a new message on submit. And you can type and set that new message. So again, I'm typing, I'm setting that new message, and then when I do enter, or when I click on the submit button. So that's the trick, by the way. You need to put this form around the submit button and the thing you're trying to automatically send, and only then does this enter button work, right? So, oh, by the way, because I'm not on the server right now, you won't be able to see my message because I'm on localhost. And Slack is sending these messages not to my local server, but to my LukeGG server. So I can't do this test here. I'd have to do it here, right? Here it does work, but localhost it does not. While I was developing this, I had another Slack setting where you don't need to use a server and it uses a socket instead with them. But again, that's just for development. So if you want to have it in a server, you need to turn that off eventually and use the events API, which I did. Okay, so very good. We have a new message, and while the message count is not the same as the amount of messages that I have, we're showing this loader that you see here. In this case, I added a message to my, here I'll show you. We can go to Slack, and the message count, the messages is 0 because the API did not give me any, but my message count went up by 1 because I sent a message, like you can see that happens here. So there's a disconnect now between the amount that I should have and the amount that I actually read, and in that case it shows a loading symbol. So that's how I do that one. Okay, so and here you can even see like a message count higher than the message's length, then show a spinner, else show a paper plane. Nice. Okay, so another thing that I do here is that I say whether I'm online or offline, and I have a class here too. So this is gray because I'm offline, and when I'm online it's green. And then it also says I'm currently online or I'm currently offline, right? Okay, so and that property again comes from the API. So this, I can discuss this feature in this page much better from the API side. That's really the complex part. This part is pretty simple. Just render some basic messages. You can see here, messages, map over them, put them all together, easy. Okay, and last Twilio. Twilio also pretty basic. Oh, the meeting page, yeah, meeting. Oh, okay, well, it's basic, but it's still some code. We have a local audio, local video, which is the left side. And then we have on the right side the remote video and remote audio. And I render these at the bottom. You can see them. Tick, 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 here. You can see we have meeting, video wrapper, local, and remote. Right? And inside you have a video element and audio element. Okay, now when I connect, well, let's talk about that later. Let's first look at this use effect. So when the page loads, we have a use effect hook, and it says if there's a token, we're done. So this is only going to happen if there's no token yet. Okay, and a token is something that the API gives me. So maybe I can show you. Tick, 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 Twilio. Here it is, my Twilio request, and it comes back with a token. So if the token already exists, then we don't do anything. But in the first case, it won't exist, so we continue. Then, if I don't have a query room, which is this here, by default you don't have it. You arrive at the page without it. Then we're going to create one. We're first going to find one in your local storage, which is here, right here. Because I saved the room here in case you kind of leave the page and come back, you go back to that same room so you don't lose the person you were talking to. If you want to get back, it wasn't like an accidental click, right? But if we can't find it there, if we can't find it in your local storage, then we're going to set it. So we say set query room is the query room or nano ID. So we execute a new nano ID because all we need to know is that this room is unique. It has nothing to do with security. As long as it's unique, we're fine, right? And unguessable, right? Because you can't guess a nano ID when it's randomly generated like this. And then you can share this link with the person you want to talk to. And that's it. And the web data itself, like the data from your video cam, will be sent directly between the two anyway. So that should be secure. Like the WebRTC protocol handles that part. So there's no real sensitive information here. And you'll be able to see whoever you're connected to as well. So should be fine. Now, save the current room ID to local storage. Okay, so yeah, you saw me get it before, but if it didn't exist and I created it, and now if that is the case, because the first time on the website or something, or you left the room, which also clears your local storage, boom. But if you come back, then again, this will be empty, so you always need to set it. Every time this runs, you're gonna generate your room code. Okay, that's what this does. And then it's gonna get the Twilio token with the query room. Now, this token will, of course, it will return a token and set it, okay? And when it sets it, this will execute, because this is like the opposite part of the equation. This says, okay, whenever the query room changes or the token changes, I want this thing to run again. But in this case, if there is no token, we stop, right? Because we only want to execute this here. If there's no token, then we stop, because we want the token to be set. Okay, so we went to the API, we went back, the token was returned. Now we can give it to our Twilio video plugin. So I say, okay, we're gonna have a room, but for now it's null. I'm gonna connect with this video, and video is coming from Twilio, right? So Twilio gives us this whole thing. It's basically a hands-free approach, super easy. Connect to the token, connect with this token, and by the way, here is the room that we're gonna use. Okay, the token also has this room inside of it, so these two need to be the same. Okay, so then we're going to get a room. If meanwhile somebody left the room, we're just going to stop, right? If the token has been removed, if anything happens here, we're going to stop. But now put the token in the rooms in this scope, because we want that, because we need that room to be accessible, because if this use effect stops, if we're leaving the page, then we want to disconnect or remove the listener from the room. Okay, so that's why I'm moving it from inside here to outside here by doing this little technique with room, having it there. Perfect. Okay, so now the video connected, at least our local one, always connected, so I connect those immediately, the audio and the video. And then you can see that I first get the audio and video tracks, which is kind of a complicated setup, but yeah, that's how Twilio writes their code. And then, but I just get it out somehow, right? After a lot of digging and a lot of dots, we get there. And then we get the audio and attach it to the audio, and video we attach. And then I remove the function, the class name hide, to kind of show the video, right? Because by default it's hidden. Okay, and then we're going to loop over the participants. We're going to connect to the participants, but usually you'll find that this thing will be empty. So participant length will be 0, so this won't execute. But if it is, by the way, it would work, right? If a participant is already in the room, it would work, it would connect, but this will usually not go. This is what you want. You want to listen for when someone connects, because that's usually the case. You come to the page, you copy the link, you give it to someone else, they join, done, right? So that's why you want this second part. So the onConnect function, as you can see, super important. And that's the end, by the way. So we just need to know how to do this. OnConnect, which is the most difficult function, I guess, that we have. So let's open her up and have a look. So we get a participant, right? We know that we have a participant, and then we want to know when their video track or their audio track is available for us to show. So we say, okay, when there's a track subscribed, let us know. And then if the track kind is video, we connect it to the video, and if it's audio, we connect it to the audio. And then the same thing for the opposite side, right? So if it's unsubscribed, they left, they disconnected, their internet went down, they left the page, something. Then we want to know, okay, which track, detach it. And in case of video, we also want to add the hide class, because it will show the last frame of that you received in your video chat, in your video thing. So we don't want to show that, we want to just hide it, but we know that the actual track has been disconnected. Right, so it's fine. And the same with audio, we just disconnect it. And that's it. That's the whole thing for the meeting. for the messenger, for cooking, for career, and the dashboard. The only thing I guess that is left, maybe that I can show you, is the use Google. This is the one that I haven't talked about yet. Oh, and use Socket, which of course is a WebSocket, which is pretty hardcore. Let's go over use Socket first. It's pretty complicated. So again, by default, we're mounted true. Mounted means like we exist. This has been loaded into the page, and when it unloads, it gets put on false. Here, when it unloads this effect, right? This effect that I talked to you about, use effect. When it unloads, we put this on false. The use socket instance no longer run on the component, and then my event listeners will no longer be working, which is on purpose, right? I want to turn them off, so that's why I check on mounted here, which is a good effect. Now, send a JSON message if the socket is open. So you can see always if it's not open, then return, and if it's open, then we send it. So that's how we just send something over the socket. Very straightforward. That's how you send a message. And I always send the property like text. I can actually show you this socket, like how it actually works. Network, WS, API look, messages. And here you can see I arrived on the page, online true, text. And I'm not showing you this text here, because this is the text that I'm getting in my Slack, but I didn't want to show it here, right? So I'm just filtering it out. But now you can see that I said text hi, and I got back an object from my API that also said text hi. But like you said, like you're sending this, but I'm not showing it immediately. I'm just showing the loader. Only when the API gives it back to me from Slack do I verify that this message has been sent, right? So in that case, I get this object back with the date and who sent it, and the text. So you can see this how sockets work. Very nice. Up, down. Beautiful. Okay. So is there anything specific that I want to show? No. I mean, this is just initializing a socket. I mean, you just do new WebSocket and give the socket URL. That's how you set up a socket in the front end. It's really straightforward. The only thing you might want to do, of course, is you want to add event listeners to the socket for when there's a closing or an error. In this case, I immediately just start up the socket again, and I try to initialize it immediately as well to add more listeners again. So if the server ever goes down or restarts, or some internet connection disconnects and connects again, you should immediately be connected again to the socket. So that's a feature I try to write in. Okay, very straightforward. Now, last one, use Google. Use Google is a beautiful one. We go to the authenticate endpoint to ask whether we're signed in. This, by the way, executes on app. I put this here. So when the app loads up, we have a reference for the socket, but the immediate use effect we do is authenticate. So we always authenticate. Now, when we come back from signing in with Google, I'll show you again. You can see it real quick as the website loads. Look at the URL bar. Boom. See that sign-in code equals this, right? So that is a piece. That's this code, and that code I send to my authenticate function. And if I give that code, it'll use that code to talk to Google to see who I am. And else, as a fallback, it tries to find out who I am based on the cookie that I have. And if I don't have any cookie, then it knows I'm signed out. Right, so those are the three things that can happen. You can sign in with a code, you can sign in with a cookie, or you cannot sign in at all. Those are your options. Okay, and the cookie again has to be matched with an object. Anyway, we'll get there when we talk about the backend. Let's go to the use Google. Authenticate. Perfect. Post. We again include the cookies, of course, right? That's part, else it won't work. And we need to send the code. But again, this could be an empty string. So the backend will check, and if it's an empty string, it'll check my cookies instead. Okay, and that's it. And then it just it tells me if I'm a user, and it will return null if I'm not. So no matter what the response is, I will just dispatch it to my store and put it under user, and then I can render this image and this text when I'm signed in, because my API will give that data to me. And sign out, very straightforward, even simpler, right? Like we just, the only thing I had to remember that I initially forgot is to remove your recipes from your local memory and change the recipes to the default recipes that are in the constants file. So I removed the ones that were loaded from your AWS account when you sign out. And other than that, this is always null. So it puts the user on null, recipes back to basics, and you're signed out. But now the cookie is also cleared because we can't remove the cookie ourselves. It's a HTTP and only cookie, so the web client can't really reach that cookie. I can't even see whether I have a cookie or not because it's HTTP only, right? So when I show you this cookies variables, where was it? Oh, this is a WebSocket, so it won't show. XHR authenticate cookies. Here you go. This cookie I can't read from the front end because it's HTTP only, as you can see there. HTTP only check, so I can't reach it. It's not visible from within the page with JavaScript. It's only visible to the browser and to the API. Okay. Oh yeah, and I cleared this filter only show my recipes when you sign out as well. And that's it. Okay, so now we talked about the whole client. It took a while. Might not have been the best introduction, but you know, I just went over everything real quick, talk a bit about it, and hopefully you find this useful. Let me know. But now we're going to go from client to server. So we're not done. Damn, you thought we were done, but no, we're not. We're continuing. So first, API. We got a very few lines of code. Honestly, this API is super clean in my view. I think this is one of the best ways to write an API. There's many more difficult ways, but I think this is the clean way that you want for, especially for smaller projects. But I would honestly do it for bigger ones too. So we have in the start we have nodemon, which is a script that starts something and then restarts it if it crashes. And also changes it whenever any code changes, right? And there's a configuration for that, which I've set here. So I say if any of the source files change inside of this API, then you can restart. And then what does starting mean? Well, it means npx tsnode src. So this is a bunch of stuff. npx is a system program that comes with a node. So you have npm, node, and npx. And npx is to execute certain programs that you have installed that you don't have globally installed. So tsnode is not globally installed. It's only installed in the node modules inside of the API. But by typing npx, it'll find it inside the node modules folder and execute it. So this is the same as node, but it allows you to write TypeScript. tsnode that's it. And then I say go to the source folder, of course, which automatically means it'll find the index file. So that's where we need to start. Okay, so let's have a start at the index file. So in the beginning, it'll load the environment variables into the things inside of this file will be loaded into the process environment variables. That's what this method does. And I showed you before this example, there's a lot of secrets and codes and things we need in order to make this API work. So this is a very important file, and this way it gets loaded in. Then we have an HTTP handler and a WebSocket handler coming from root, which we'll use a little bit down in this code. I'll show you first where we use it. Server starts being null, but can also be a server, right? Easy. And then depending on whether we have an HTTPS port defined, so in my local, on my own computer, I don't have this defined. I work on HTTP, so I just have this empty. And in that case, we go to this else statement. It just creates a server directly on the HTTP port, and else it creates a redirect on the HTTP. Here it creates a redirect to the HTTPS, and it sets up the HTTPS server with certificates that you have to set on your server inside of the SSL folder, inside the LukeGG folder, which by default is also ignored. If you go to git ignore, you can see SSL is ignored as a file. So you can put it there without worrying about accidentally committing it or something, because of course these are your private, need to stay highly secure certificate files. Okay, so index. Okay, very good. And again, priv key, cert, and chain. This comes from I use certbot. to get my certificates, because you can get an SSL certificate for free that way. So it's basically amazing. You just use certbot and you can get HTTPS on your server for free. Do it. It's the best way. People used to pay so much money for SSL certificates, it was ridiculous. But now you just can do it for free. It's ridiculous. The world has changed. Okay, so as you can see, the HTTP handler is used no matter if we do it on HTTPS or HTTP, right? So that doesn't matter, it's just a wrapper. And the HTTP handler is most important. And then the WebSocket server takes the HTTP server and wraps around it, so that if somebody now connects with the WebSocket protocol, like WS instead of HTTP, then it'll go to this WS handler. That's how that works. And here you see that I imported from root, so let's have a look at root. One thing that's interesting is that the Slack WebSocket is I connect the WS handler directly to the Slack WebSocket. So Slack is the only thing in my API that uses the WebSocket, so I just connect them directly. I just say, like, take that handler, start looking at it like Slack wants, right? Because just for messaging. And the HTTP handler, that's my baby. That's the big one. That's where we do routing to all kinds of other files inside of this API. And it starts off being very simple. I told you that the client is being hosted by the server as well, by the API. But it's just being routed from LukeGG directly to the server. So I check the host, and if the host does not exist or the API domain cannot be found, so it's not api.lukegg, it doesn't start with that, the host name of this request, then we're just going to say, oh, then this must be a client file. So just load it like a file, right? So I just say return file, request response, go ahead, do your thing, right? So this file loads a static file from inside the client build folder. Okay, so we're going to create a new URL. And we're gonna get the path name of that URL, and then join it up with my build folder in the client that is just hosted on the API on the C drive, like very straightforward. And then we see if we can access it. And if it's a folder, by the way, if it's an error, we're going to show index, and also if it's a directory, we're going to show index. Right, so index HTML is like the default thing to load when anything goes wrong. And then, but if everything went right and we found the file, then we're just going to read the file as a binary and also send it. If there was no error, we're just going to send it directly, like here. We get the type from the meme media internet type module, which figures out what content type you have to send in the header. Right, so you can have image JPEG or application JSON or favicon, whatever. So this is automatically figured out by giving the file name, and meme will figure out what to send. And then we write it as a binary and done. Okay, so it's very straightforward. This is like your tiniest. Most people will use something like Express or something only because they basically want this, which is so dumb, because this is 35 lines of code. Why would you use an entire library, hundreds and thousands of lines of code, for something that's so tiny, right? So just use something like this, right? You can download it for free from my GitHub. Easy. Okay, back to root. So if it's not a file, now we know that we are dealing with an API request. They want data from the API. So we're always going to send back the headers application JSON, because we're always going to respond with JSON. Like, literally never are we not going to respond with JSON. So access control allow origin. This is great because we're running from the luke.gg domain and we're connecting to the api.lukegg domain. And even though it's the same server in the end, I wanted to write this server as if it could be separate, so that I can put the client anywhere I want. And as long as it's allowed, it's fine. In this case, the only thing that's allowed is what you have written down as the client domain inside your environment variables. That's the only thing that's going to be allowed to make requests. Okay, so, and again, the thing about, I don't know if you know what pre-flight requests are, but if you do a cross-origin request, the first request will be options. Maybe I can show you this. Here, you see plus pre-flight. So the pre-flight request is an options request. Maybe, can I click this? I'm clicking it, but it doesn't work. Does it show me the options? No, select pre-flight. I'm selecting it. Well, anyway, so you see this method here, and pre-flight means that there was an HTTP request before this GET request, and it sent an options method. And it doesn't want any content. It just wants to get these headers to know whether it's even allowed to make a request, right? That's how it works. So as soon as we know that it's an options, we set the headers, we are done. We're just going to set 200 OK, everything's fine, and we're done. Okay, so now we're dealing with a normal request, not a pre-flight request anymore. So this can be a GET or a POST. But even if it's a GET, it won't have any data, but we can still do this. So we'll do it anyway, because we're waiting for the request to end before we're going to respond, right? So in the case of a POST, that'll take a while first, because it'll send the data first. But for a GET, this will instantly continue. So we're getting the chunks of data, we're adding, it starts off being empty, we add all the chunks, and then we're done. And here we have the raw data. So we're going to try to parse the data, which should always be JSON as well, and parse it into the body. And if it fails, then we say, oh, something went wrong, my bad. And then body will stay null, which is also the case for gets. It will stay null, right? And because then the body length will be 0 and it'll just be null. It won't even try to parse anything. So body should be null most of the time, except at the post and if the JSON data was correct. And then we are going to route to the one of the routes, which I just manually wrote down one by one, very simple. And I import these from other files. And if none of these were found, then we're just going to say 404 and we're done. Straightforward. Okay. Okay, so let's go down this list from top to bottom. Boom, close the others, boom, GitHub, boom, there we go. GitHub is a wonderful one, very straightforward. So we have the data from GitHub and we need to know what the GitHub start year was. In my case, 2011. That's when I created my GitHub account. And we're gonna load all the data from GitHub, but we're not gonna do it all the time. We're gonna do it year by year. And we're only going to do it if this current day has not yet been fetched, right? So if nobody has requested yet for today how many requests, how many contributions I made on GitHub, then we will load it, and else it'll be in the cache on the server. So this is my local cache, right? So let's start off here with the default request. In this case, we're going to say, here you see that I'm checking for the current day whether it's in the cache, and if it's not, then we're going to generate the data again. We're going to fetch the data from GitHub. So first I'm going to calculate real quick how many years I need to fetch the data from, right? So 2011, and take the year for this current year, and then the difference between those. And that's the length of the array. +1 is the length of the array of the amount of years we want to get. We also want to get this year as well, by the way. So that's why we're doing that +1, because we don't want to just get the difference. We want to get this one too. So then we have total length. Again, I do fill with null because else the map doesn't work. So you need to fill with null, and then I can use this index. And I take that start year and I add the index to it again. So then I end up with an array of years, like 2011, 2012, all the way till the current year. That's how that array works. And then we're gonna do a very special thing. This is amazing. This is where we await promise all, and then the entire array is turned into a list of functions. So it was a list of years, but now for each year we're going to create a new promise for load year, which I did here. And because it's an async function, it'll always return a promise. And promise all wants to get a list, an array of promises, and waits for all of them to be done, and then gives them back to you with all the results in that array instead. So it starts off as an array of promises and ends up with an array of values, and then we can loop over those values and put them together. And we put them together for the contributions, we put them together for the total, and then we have a new local cache that's been updated. And after it's been updated, we stringify this. And the next person that requests this data, this will be false, because we will have the local cache of these contributions for today, right? So then it goes immediately to just this last 2 lines where it sends the cache. So it's very efficient. We don't spam GitHub. We only ask once per day. Okay, so now load years, of course, where we really go to GitHub for that specific year. The reason I'm doing it per year is because that's the maximum year, the maximum time period that GitHub allows you to load the data from, right? So else I would have just loaded it in one request, but they don't allow that. They have it paginated per year. That's the maximum you can get. So I basically get the current year. It's later to compare and to make sure I get a from and a to. And I say it here too, if we're loading data for this year, then load until the current date time. That's my final date. So I have my from and my to set, and then I make the request. And it's a very straightforward GraphQL request. I post it. I have my GitHub access token in my environment variables. That's how my authorization is done. And here I have a GraphQL query where I say, all right, give me my GitHub username. That's the one I want to check. I want to check in the contributions collection from this date to that date. Give me the calendar, give me the total contributions, weeks, contribution days, count, and date. So you can see that the structure is kind of complicated, way more complicated than what I have. I simply have, if you look at my types, and you're looking at contributions, this is the body that GitHub has. Really complicated data set, right? Array and an array instead of multiple. That's how GraphQL gives it. But how I save it in the end is simply like having the date as a string in the object and then the number of contributions I made that day next to it. And this is just a very big object, right? So I don't put it per every week, for every year. Like I don't separate anything. Like I just put them all together because the date, of course, is already unique. It has the full it's not just the date, like it's not just the day, it is the year dash month dash day. That's the format of this date. So and that's also what they use, by the way, so it's kind of useless the way they separate and structure it, but I'm sure they have their reasons. I mean, GraphQL is for a reason. So yeah, I just have it much more simple in my local cache. These are my contributions, and of course the total is just a number, just a single number. Okay, so that is my GitHub response, and again I can show you what that looks like. I should probably refresh and go to GitHub. Here you can see this is what I have in my local cache. I have the total and then the contributions, which is a massive file. And if you go over it quickly, you see only a bunch of zeros, but you have to go a bit slower. Actually, does it show everything? Oh no, it doesn't. Okay, well, it's a very big list. And here towards the end you see every day multiple contributions. All right, so that is what my calendar is based upon, is this request. Back to root and going to Twilio. Oh, what a tiny file. This must be the smallest file ever. But you see a lot of environment variables. That's Twilio, right? So we're getting Twilio, getting the dependency, the module. We're configuring a JSON Web Token, access token, video grant stuff. We ask for a new video grant for the room that the client wants, that it's sending in the body, right? And identity, something interesting too. Identity is something that just, again, it just needs to be unique for a user. And I actually save it localhost, and so that if they disconnect and reconnect, the Twilio service will throw out the correct person that just disconnected and connect the correct identity again. So it's not very important actually, but it just needs to be saved and needs to be unique. So it's just a generated ID that we send over HTTPS to the server. Okay, so we get a new token, we get our account, our API, and our secret, so we can definitely prove that we're allowed to do this. And then we add a grant for the video there to it for that room, and then make sure that also the token is aware of what identity we have, and then we turn that token to a JSON Web Token, and that's the token that's being used in the front end. And that's it. So again, Twilio implementation is very straightforward. Like with the Twilio.ts on the backend and the meeting.tsx on the front end and the use Twilio hook, those three files can give you the entire ability that kind of Skype uses. Like, you know, it's a video sharing service, so you get all of that, and then you can change it how you want it, add features, So I definitely really enjoy their service. It's wonderful. And WebRTC is great as well, because the WebRTC means the data doesn't even go to their server. It goes directly from your PC to their PC, right? So there's no ability to be hacked when you're using WebRTC. At least Twilio can't hack you because they don't really have access to the data. You're not sending them the video itself, the stream itself. So it's super secure. And that's just how Twilio works. I mean, that's how WebRTC works. And Twilio also has options to automatically do it differently, but then you have to configure it in your account. And again, you can see in the code very clearly that it's not doing that when you're using these other kinds of rooms, these WebRTC rooms, which they call Go rooms. Nice. Okay, so let's look at the sign in and all the other Google stuff, right? Because there in the beginning, when you click that link, you're being redirected. So when I click on this link initially, you can see in the left corner that I go to api.luke.gg/sign in, and that basically is then routed here, sign in to the redirect. So it asks it comes in, and we're going to calculate real quick the URL that we need to send you to, right? And it's straightforward. Like it's just a bunch of easy stuff, and the only thing is the client, the domain, the Google client ID. That's part of the query parameters that you want to send. And then we're going to redirect you to there. Simple. So that the initial one is super basic. Redirect the user, right? And then the difficult or more difficult one is when they come back. They have that code in there, So again, I'll show you. You have to be quick, but you can look in the left top. They have this code variable in top. That's then being sent from the client to us again. And so here it comes. Here's the code. Now, if there is no code, I told you we're going to check the cookies, right? We're going to try to see if you have cookies set. And if we do, then we're going to find your user based on that email address. But if you don't have an email address, you don't have the cookie, then you're just going to be null, right? And if we can't find that user in our local cache, then you're also going to be null. So by default, you're signed out. But if you have a cookie and you were signed in before, then we're going to find you again. Okay, so now we're going to go to the interesting case. The case where we have a code from Google that you gave me, and so I need to verify with Google if this is truly you, and then who you are, and most importantly, what your email address is, because I can never trust you to give me your email address, right? If you tell me, hey, this is my email address, like, no, like you're a hacker and you're trying to be that guy, but you're not. But Google can verify with that token if you really are who you say you are. So that's that authentication part, right? So I'm going to make a request for a token to Google, and I'm going to put that code in, and I'm going to also tell Google who I am and where I redirected you to, right? Like where you redirected to after you came back. And I'm going to ask for authorization code. Okay. So if it fails, then we're going to sign you out. Done. Right, we're going to send back null and we're good. But if it did not fail, then we have these tokens here right now. And then I can use that token, to use those tokens to get your data, your user info. And this contains your email as well. So that's what I want. And then I have the ID token to prove who I am, identity token. So I can say this is the access token, this is the ID token, give me the information of who this guy is. And it should work. I should get to know who you are. If it failed, then we're going to sign you out. If it succeeded, then I now know who you are. And then I'm going to save you in the local cache. Based on your email, I'm going to save you and have your name, your picture, your email address, and a bunch of other data. And then I'm going to set that cookie with your email so that next time you refresh, you don't have to do that code thing again. You can just immediately, based on this signed cookie, I know who you are. Okay, and that's it. So that's the whole Google authentication flow. And as you could see in the front end, it's actually really basic, right? Like we basically did nothing. We took a code and sent you away, right? Sent that code and we got the user back. And when you tried to sign in, I just sent you to the server again. The server redirected you correctly to another place in Google, and that's it. So very simple. And again, this file is also only 117 lines. I mean, I've written like style sheets that are like 100 times bigger than this. Like, this is ridiculous how tiny amount of code can do so much, because people love to sign in with Google. I mean, who the fuck wants to get their own forgot password nonsense account system? You just want to use a service provider like Google, because if something goes wrong with their password or something goes wrong with their account and they need to contact support, then they're not going to contact you, they're going to contact Google. I mean, that's that perfect part of a service provider, that they take these services and they're better than what we can possibly be as individual developers. Okay, so sign out, super basic. I already showed you. All right, we went over this. So removes the cookie, sends back null, done. Slack. So Slack is very interesting, but I think I want to talk about AWS first, and then we do Slack at the end because it also has the Slack WebSocket and the HTTP endpoint. So let's start with AWS, because AWS is also such a beauty. And we're really nearing the end now. This has been a long video. Okay, so here we have the recipe type as well. So again, I'll show you real quick the types that we have, right? Recipes, the Google module for the user, the Slack module has the WebSocket messages, and you've seen these types before on the front end. I'm just repeating some of them in the back end, only the ones I need, of course. Slack event here. This is interesting. This is really like the way Slack works with thread IDs and IDs for messages, stuff like that. GitHub I showed you already, and that was it. Okay, so with the recipe, first of all, we want to get the configuration for AWS to get access. We get our secret, our region, our key, everything. And then we want to specifically use the S3 service. This is really the only one we want to use in this file. So we get it here. Then again, for the cookie reading, I want to know what your email address is. I don't need to know your user, right? I don't need to access that. I just need to know your email address, because then based on that, I will create a folder for you that only you can use to upload things. So everything you upload will always be inside your email address, like a folder. That's very important, and you can see how that works here. So we can see if you want to upload an image, we're going to ask the AWS for a pre-signed URL. We're going to split the extension, find out what file you're trying to upload. That file should be an image JPEG, right? Because if it's not, then we're going to send, hey, you should only upload JPEG images. That's currently what I want, right? Easy. Then we're going to generate a unique file name. And that has the email in the start, right? So you can see that the file key is always email in the start, which comes from Google. So this helps me verify that I'm not, you're not messing with other people's files when you're uploading stuff. You're always doing it within your own little playground. And here you see I have another nano ID, so I know that it's going to be unique. Like, you're not going to accidentally overwrite another file. And then I put the same extension that you had. As long as it's a JPEG image, you can keep using the extension that you were having in your file name. Okay. And here you can see I finally do the actual SDK call, where I say, okay, for this bucket, I want a publicly accessible file. I want to upload a file that's going to be publicly accessible, because you're going to read it without authentication directly from the server, right? So I assume that these files, these recipe pictures that you're uploading, even though I'm not going to show them to anyone else, nobody else is going to load them. Theoretically, if someone knows the URL, which again is a very difficult to guess URL, but if they know it, then they can read it. So that means that if you have access, you can actually share the link of your uploaded image that you find inside of the web page. So it's just easy, and I don't need to do any authentication. It is possible, by the way, to do authentication, but then I would have to send the images past my server again, which I don't want to do. I want to save bandwidth and directly load things from S3. Alright, so then I give him the key, and that's it. And then I told you before, I'll send back the link where you can download the image after it's uploaded, and the upload specifics that you need to send that form. Right, so that's how the pre-signed URL works. Now, this is where you want to save the JSON of the recipes that you want to save, right? Your recipes, only yours, not the default ones. And this is even easier. In this case, I don't even need to pre-sign anything. I just say, okay, whatever you just sent me is going to be saved into the file. I'm going to call that file email and then index.json. Straightforward. and I'm going to always make it public. And also, so I'm not asking you to upload it, I'm doing it myself here. I say s3 put object, because index.json files are so small that I don't mind doing it from the server. Big image files I do care, but small text files I can do myself. And then whether it succeeded or not, I say yes or no, and it's done. So that's how a save works. And now the final of the final of the final, Slack integration. This is how Slack is done. Okay, so we have a bunch of sockets here, and we use those sockets to tell people whether I'm online or not. And when I write good morning, so let me show an example. When I write good morning, then my bot will respond good morning, Luke. And that's what this thing is doing here. You can actually see it here. Good morning, Luke. Or good night, Luke. And that will change my online status. Originally, I wanted to get the actual online status from Slack. However, I read that they deprecated that API, that real-time messaging API that they used to have for that, that their own Slack client obviously uses, right? Because it knows whether I'm green here or not. That one is no longer available to developers outside of Slack, unfortunately. So I had to do something else. I had to do the good morning, good night. So every day I talk to my bot in the morning and the evening. It's a very normal thing, I guess. Here we say also something. The channel that I'm using, this general channel, has an ID, and I put that ID in the environment variable, so that's the way I keep talking to the right channel, right? Okay, so let's go back up. Sockets. Wonderful. Now, you know, this gets real complicated, because what I would need to do is, in the beginning, when somebody writes, the bot will write in the Slack. But then that message, from that point onwards, we want to continue talking in the thread, like we do here, right? So if I say, for instance, here, I say, hi, hello, what we're talking inside of a thread. And in the beginning, there is none, right? So the bot sends a message, and then it needs to set the thread for the upcoming messages that are coming from that WebSocket. And that's what this function is doing, basically, or what this queue is doing. It's basically saying this message will be used. How can I explain this? I mean, I can show you the part, because there's two parts that matter here inside of this system. There is the WebSocket that's talking to my web client, and there's Slack events, and this is Slack talking to me. So this is coming from the Slack API, this is coming from our guys from the website, right? So that's the difference. And I need them to communicate in some cases. So here we have a thread. The WebSocket always talks within this thread. So it needs to, after it sends that message, it needs to wait until the event gets read from the HTTP handler, and then that handler needs to set this thread. And the way I do that is by pushing the thread into the queue. So I say, if we don't have a thread yet, then we're going to send a function into that queue that will be executed by the Slack API, basically, when it arrives, and that will set my thread, right? And then I will in turn also save a function that allows that Slack API to talk to my web client. So that's how I'm doing that here. I'm connecting them this way. So that's how I'm connecting them. So these two objects, this one is a list that's just executed once, and this is an object that can be used for reference. Those are then used to send WebSocket messages or events the other way. Okay, so a little complicated, maybe a bit too complicated, but yeah, that's why I put all these comments here, so you can calmly read them and figure out how it works. And of course, it should work out of the box if you put your environment variables right, and if you configure the Slack API. You need to configure a webhook, and you need to activate the events API. And there's also this small thing in the beginning, and I wrote that here, this thing, to set up the webhook. Slack will verify first whether you own the server. So you need to be able to activate, you need to just turn on this line and nothing else, which will send back the challenge that they write, and then Slack will be happy with your API, and it'll green mark it and put it under your bot. So your bot will then be associated with your domain. So api.luke.gg is associated to my luke.gg bot because I have verified it with this challenge. Okay, so that's how it works. Okay. And when this event comes in, I can immediately stop the response. So I just say, okay, thank you Slack, done. Because now we don't need to respond to the hook, right? That's not a user, it's just a bot who is talking to me. So what's important is this body that they've sent, this Slack event that they sent. And I'm going to look into it and see whether a bot wrote it, and then set the thread like I told you before. We're going to get the text. If there is no text, then it's probably something else. It's some other kind of event that I'm accidentally getting, or I don't know what it is. Like if a message is deleted, I get it as well. But I don't care about any of that, right? I only want to get the new messages. So that's why I delete this, or I return this. I don't care about this. I log unexpected events that I don't expect because I only know these two right now. I haven't seen any others yet, but if there are others, it will be logged, and I can probably add it to this queue. So to this list, to this array, so it can be ignored because we just don't care about those events. So now we're dealing with an event I'm interested in. We know that. So if the user writes good morning or good night, we're going to switch the indicator and tell all the WebSockets whether I'm online or not. So that's important, but let's ignore that for now too, right? So the whole good morning, good night thing for the present. But this is the case when the user is actually using the chat. Right, so we're gonna get that respond function that the WebSocket has set from the threads, and we're gonna do it based on either the thread of this message or the ID of this message if it's the first one. So it's either gonna be, if it's like this message, then it finds this message ID to the thread TS, and if it's the first message, then it won't have one of these, so it'll automatically use its own. Right, so that way we always have a function to respond to, so this should never be false, but okay. In the case where I'm connecting with localhost, for instance, this is accidentally false because Slack is sending messages to the wrong API, and it's not actually, this whole thing is not even executing in that case. So there are edge cases, so I'm just checking whether respond is there. If it's not, we're done. And then when I can respond, this will go to the WebSocket, and now I'm really sending finally this Slack event that I received directly to the client that has originally sent it. And again, there can be multiple people writing to me at the same time. Still, only the people that I write to in their thread will get that message. Not everyone will get every message, right? So it's grouped up based on this, and I use the thread system for that. And the WebSocket, interesting, now it's from the other side, right? So push the WebSocket. This is the WebSocket handler that was defined in root. So here comes a new connection, right? It opened up. And in the beginning, I'm going to send them immediately whether I'm online or not, of course. And then I'm going to keep checking the WebSocket connection in case it ever closes. So if it's open or connecting, then I'm fine. But if it's closing or closed, then I'm going to clear the interval, delete the thread, clean up everything, clean up the WebSockets, clean everything up, right? So we keep checking all the time whether it's still open. And if it's not, if something happened, we're going to close everything and clean everything up in terms of memory and stuff. And also just security, that we don't want to have anything lying around. Okay, so and then when a message is received, somebody wrote a message to me, there's only ever text inside of it. You can't send anything else to the API. We're going to send that text to the channel, right? Then straight up. If we have a thread, then we're going to immediately put that in the message so it arrives inside here. And else we're going to send it without it. We're going to send it directly, but we're also going to set this thread queue to make sure that when that message later then is received, we will set the thread, because here we do it. And this is called, oh no, how did I forget that word? I know that Google even had an entire library with the exact same name, trolling everyone because it was such a programming paradigm to do it. But what I'm trying to say is the scope we have here. This let thread is this one, we want to access this inside the other function, but by giving a function to it, scoping it, that then internally does it. Here we're basically giving the other part of our code access to this part, but not real access. It can only access this function and can only tell us the thread. That's it. And then basically we do it from inside here. I can't believe I forgot that word for it. Oh well, doesn't matter. Okay. All right, so we have the thread set, very good. And again, here we do the same thing. If it's no longer open, delete the thread. Delete the function that is used to write back to the client, is basically what I'm saying. And then send a message if it's not, if it is open. And then finally, here is where we actually send the message. So this is talking about WebSocket communication again, but this is talking about to Slack, right? Send the message to Slack, and we're using a default Slack hook. Very simple to set up because you just have a post and you put the message in there and it's done. Like, it's just nothing simpler than sending a message to Slack in the end, because it's just this simple fetch request. And again, we log it if something goes wrong, and then I can look in the server if anything went wrong. All right, well, that was a conversation about all the code that is required to write this app. I went over every line. I'm going to keep working on this. This has only been 4 days so far. I look forward to it, and I hope that this video can help you in getting started with your project. And well, good luck.